Okay, so the chapter which we are starting today is chapter number 2, chemical changes and reactions, right? So, right away. Okay, so in this chapter, we'll be studying about different types of chemical changes and chemical reactions, basically chemical reactions. And if you remember, I had told you in grade 8 that when we were studying the same chapter, we had a chapter where we were discussing 5 types of reactions. So I had told you then that we have the same chapter in grade 9. So this is that chapter. Okay, so in this we'll be studying basically about the 5 types of reactions, and we'll also study about the reactions which involve like energy changes. Okay, so that is like taking in energy, giving out energy, different types of energy, light energy, electrical energy. Okay, all those kind of things we'll be discussing in this chapter. It's actually a very simple chapter if you understand how to study that. Okay, so to start with this, there are no definitions in this chapter. Good news. Okay, so you don't have to study any definition for direct combination or displacement or whatever. You just need to know what that reaction is. So if a question comes, the questions will be uh, what is direct combination reaction. So when a question comes as what is, you can write the answer in your own words, right? So there is no something which you don't have to like write it as it is given in the textbook and all. So that is one good thing. So you can understand the reaction and you can write your answers. Okay, so chemical reaction. So chemical reaction, what is a chemical reaction? So chemical change in which matter changes into a new substance. We have studied about chemical changes, physical changes and all in our previous classes, that is your grade 8 classes. Okay, so basically going into that, so it's like basically if you study about what is a chemical reaction, and also it's basically the energy which is being exchanged in a reaction. So there will be reactions in which we will be providing energy to the reactants and thereby producing a chemical change in it. And there will be certain reactions in which the reactants, you just miss the reaction and then it will give out energy. Okay, so we have studied those reactions as endothermic reaction, exothermic reactions and all. Okay, so in these reactions, in whatever reactions we are talking about, these reactions will involve basically uh, the like the breaking of bonds or making of bonds. Okay, so what you have to understand is when a chemical change happens or when a chemical reaction happens, the bonds which are already existing, that is the bonds in the reactants, they will break and they will form new bonds. Okay, so the breaking and making of bonds can differ in different ways, and that is how we get all these different types of chemical reactions. Okay, so breaking of the bonds and making of the bonds result in a chemical change. Okay, and we already studied in the previous lesson what is a chemical equation. That is how we started balancing equations and also chemical equation, nothing but shorthand form for a chemical change. So we won't be writing anything in words anymore, so we will be studying it as in equation form, so that it is easy for us to represent also. So before we get into the types of chemical reactions, there are certain things which you need to know, which is there in your textbook, but we are not discussing it over here in detail because it is not there in your scope of syllabus, but you need to know about it. That is if a chemical reaction is taking place, how do I identify those type of reactions? So if it is a chemical reaction, okay, so for that, there are different methods to know that, which will be the first one will be effervescence. You have studied about effervescence in the chapter hydrogen and in the chapter carbon, when we were studying about carbon dioxide, when we were studying about reaction of hydrogen. Bubbles come out when we add active metals into acids. So that is how we had prepared hydrogen also in that case, if you remember. So like that bubble formation, that effervescence is actually an indication of a chemical change. As you know, that is how hydrogen gas is produced along with the salt. Similarly, there will be change of colors in certain reactions. For that, we would discuss about copper sulfate solution, into which we add a higher reactive metal, like say for example I can add zinc or I can add iron. Okay, so the copper sulfate, which is blue in color, it changes in color into green, or depending upon whatever thing. If you're adding zinc, there will be no color later on. Okay, so that is another method of identifying a chemical reaction. Then we get precipitates in certain reaction. So precipitates, we have studied precipitation reaction last year. So for a precipitation reaction to take place, you need to know that we need to have reactants which are clear. Okay, so it can be of different colors, but then they should be clear. When we bring two solutions which are clear and we mix it together, we will get one precipitate. A precipitate is a substance which does not dissolve in water. Okay, so that is a precipitate. So that is another method. And then very simple ones, that is like when we have say for example, when we are doing a particular reaction, heat is given out by that reaction, and that is called as an exothermic reaction. And certain reactions, heat is like, taken in by the reactants. At that time it is called as a endothermic reaction. Okay, so these are certain things which you need to know. Okay, so moving on to the topic, that is types of chemical reactions. In this we'll be studying 5 types of reactions. The first type of reaction which we are studying today is called as direct combination reaction or synthesis. As the name suggests, very simple reaction wherein we have got two reactants coming together, that is A and B, and it will combine and give you one single product, which is AB. Don't go for the gap between this A and B. It is actually a single compound. So A and B, and there is a bond formed between this A and B. That is how this new compound is formed. So A plus B will give you AB. This is called as direct combination reaction, right? Uh, this reaction is also known as synthesis. Now, what is the difference between direct combination and synthesis is that direct combination reaction is when two or more substances come together. Okay, so when two or more substances come together, it combines and forms one new compound. We generally call it as a direct combination reaction. Synthesis is very specific. That is, it is like when two elements come together and it forms a compound. That is called as a synthesis reaction. So say for example, iron and sulfur is coming together. It forms iron sulfide. That is a synthesis reaction. It is basically the same because synthesis is actually a part of a direct combination reaction. Okay, so direct combination, synthesis, both the same, but then synthesis is when we have yeah, doubts. Okay, one sec. Yes, Arya Gupta.
So, like you told, like for hydrogen, for H2O, when forming water, there's hydrogen and oxygen. So
Yes,
hydrogen will have a separate bond and oxygen will have a separate bond. Or when they
yes,
mix together, they have a bond.
yes, yes, it will be like that. Yes, I'll explain
So
that.
hydrogen will have a separate bond.
Yeah, I will tell you how it happens. Okay.
So your voice is breaking.
Yes. Okay, Anish. Yeah, what happened, Anish? Anish, you have a doubt? Okay, never mind. Arya Gupta, am I audible? Hello.
Sir,
Yes.
so a synthesis reaction does not have any compounds in its reacting side, right, sir?
Yeah, it is basically elements.
All
Okay.
right.
Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you.
So when it is compounds, we generally call them as direct combination reaction. Okay. So it's basically the same thing, but then when
All
it's
right.
like restricted to elements, we call it as a synthesis reaction. Okay. So I'll tell you what is this making and breaking of bonds over here. So it is like how Arya Gupta had asked. Okay. So many people raising your hands. Okay. One second. Yes, Arush, what happened?
Yeah, sir, I had internet problem when you said the precipitate reaction.
Ah.
What is that?
Precipitation is when we have precipitate form, when two reactants come together and it forms a compound which is insoluble in water. That is called as a precipitate, and the reaction which produces a precipitate is called as a precipitate.
Precipitate reaction.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, Tane Viroli, yes. Tane, you had a doubt, Tane? Okay, never mind. Okay, so continuing, this meeting will end in 5 minutes. Okay, so even if it gets over, please join in again. Okay, I don't know why, because I don't know why it is happening. I guess like some of them are logging in really early, which is why the 40-minute thing is getting over fast. Okay, so whatever it is, it will get over in 5 minutes. If it just goes off, please come back, join using the same link. Okay, and we'll continue till 9:40. Okay, yeah. So So direct combination reaction, as I was telling you about the like breaking and making of bonds. So we can take this first example which is given to you over here. Like say for example, if I'm taking hydrogen, so we have a hydrogen molecule. We know that hydrogen is a diatomic substance. Same with oxygen also. So if I am representing hydrogen, hydrogen will be represented like this. So that will be like H bond H. Okay. And then we will have plus, and then we will take O bond O. Okay. So these are the bonds existing between hydrogen and oxygen, right? So when this reaction is happening, this bond between hydrogen will break, this bond between oxygen will break, and new bonds will be formed. That will be the combination of oxygen and hydrogen. So hydrogen atom and oxygen atom will come together in order to produce this compound H2O. So since this equation is not balanced, so if I'm taking two molecules of hydrogen over here, so I'll be having like hydrogen, hydrogen, and one more hydrogen, hydrogen similarly. And that is how we get four hydrogen atoms over here and two atoms of oxygen. So the bonds will be basically, this will be breaking of bonds happening over here, and new bonds will be forming because like oxygen will combine with hydrogen, and as a result it will form water molecule. Okay, this is a case with all chemical reactions. Okay, any chemical reaction just taking place will be taking place by this method. Okay, that is by making and breaking of bonds, right? So that was direct combination reaction. The second reaction which we have is decomposition reaction. So decomposition reaction is the opposite of direct combination reaction, wherein we take one compound and that compound breaks into multiple like substances. Okay, in this we can also like take an example of one compound which will be breaking into two elements or two or more elements. We can take one compound where it breaks into two different compounds. So anything is possible. This is absolutely the same with direct combination reaction also. That is, when we take combination reaction, we can take elements, two elements combining to form a compound. We can take one element and a compound reacting to form another compound, or we can also take two compounds combining together to give you a different compound. Okay, and the reverse order of that particular reaction, that is direct combination reaction, would be decomposition reaction. So decomposition reaction does not happen automatically. We have to provide energy for decomposition reaction to take place, and the types of energy which are being used in this reaction is mentioned above and below the arrow mark, as you can see on the screen. That is delta sign. You all know what delta sign represents. Delta represents heat which is provided to the compound. Similarly, light and electricity is also given. So when it is heat provided to the compound, the type of reaction is called as thermal decomposition reaction, right? When there is light involved in the reaction, it is called as photochemical reaction, photo for light. And then when electricity is involved, we call it as electrochemical reaction. Okay, so when we have all these type of energy sources which is being given for this particular compound to undergo decomposition, okay, so it is called as a decomposition reaction. So what is decomposition reaction? It's a reaction in which one compound that has to be taken, one compound, it will decompose into two or more elements, or element and compound, or compounds. Okay, anything can be formed. It can form two elements, it can form one element and one compound, it can form two compounds. Okay, so any of this can be done by this decomposition reaction. A very simple example is given to you for decomposition reaction is decomposition of calcium carbonate. So calcium carbonate decomposes to give you two compounds, which is calcium oxide and carbon dioxide. Okay, calcium oxide and carbon dioxide. Similarly, we have another example which is copper sulfate pentahydrate, that is CuSO4.5H2O, which undergoes thermal decomposition to give you copper sulfate and water. So these two are examples of compounds which will break to give you two more compounds. So this is an example of decomposition reaction. Okay, there are a few doubts. Yeah, what is the doubt? Yes. Yes, Tanay, what's the doubt, Tanay?
Yeah, sir. In synthesis, in the first reaction, does the element?
I can't hear you. Lost you. Tanay, can you hear me?